The first thing I want to point out to you is that sometimes on a layout you have like a double track main that's curving here and things that don't let you put a bridge in, but you need some resemblance to terrain, but you still need to pass through that to get to some other area. It's quite possible to do it even with this. This is a very large door. This is about, almost a little over 5 feet that way, 3 feet here, and almost 2 feet wide. So that's to show you that you can remove a large area of the layout and hinge that. Here's the most important ingredient. This is called a piano hinge. They're sold in Home Depot and Lowe's and most any hardware store you go into. They're sold in 3-foot and 4-foot long sections. You can buy it that length and you can cut it with a hacksaw to any length you want. And when you're hinging a door that has train track going over the top of it, that's why you want to use a piano hinge, because the spine of the hinge will keep that door exactly perfectly level with the train table. I got a little trick to show you how to do that too. The first thing you do is you build the two tables, and then you build a panel to fit in between those tables. And in order to determine that that panel is going to come back to the very same place every time you raise and lower it, I use this little trick. I take a brace like this, some scrap wood, and I put it across here. I first clamp this in position, put the brace across to drive screws right into the door, like this. And then a couple of screws also into the table, so that you know that that's exactly where you want that door to come to. Now if you start that way, then you can put the hinge in and all the other hardware and it will come back up to this same place. So let's go on the underside now and we'll put the piano hinge in. There. That completes the last screw. Now I began by putting all the screws along the top here first to get the piano hinge right up into the corner, and then I went down along the table frame and put this row in. So our piano hinge is now complete. Let's go up and see how it swings. Oh, that's a nice swing, see? Door moves nice and smoothly up and down, even though it's very big and very heavy. And if you do what I do, if you put a 1/2-inch Homosote on top of your 1/2-inch plywood for the layout, make it overlap like this so that this comes over and closes up very nicely, like this. And that makes sure you have a nice closed gap. And speaking of that gap, we can now see the spine of the piano hinge going all the way down through here on the plywood. That's why a piano hinge is so much better than separate hinges, because that piano hinge will guarantee that those pieces of plywood will always line up in exactly the same place. Even if they want to warp, they can't warp. The piano hinge takes care of that. And your tabletop will always come back up to the exact same place. That's going to be very critical when we put the track on. Let's go over some of the materials and tools that we're going to need for the job. The most important thing we're going to need is something called a transom catch. A transom catch is a pretty old-fashioned piece of hardware. It used to be back in the 30s and 40s that an office door would have a window above the door, and that window was called a transom, and it had a catch on there that looked like this. It's really just a spring lever that pulls down a bolt, like a door jamb bolt, except that we can mount this one anywhere we want. And if we drill a hole right to the middle here, we can add a cable so that we can remotely pull that. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to put a couple of transom catches on a piece of the layout, and we're going to put a lever on it that we can actuate by pulling one lever. It'll open both transom catches at the same time. Now, with the transom catch comes this little clip, and that's okay for most installations, but for ours today, we're going to need this product. This is a door jamb plate, but it's unique because it's adjustable, and being adjustable, it will help you a great deal in the installation. Here are the pieces in that striker plate kit There's the plate, and instead of just putting screws through to hold it in place, this is the secret to it. It has another plate that goes on top and acts as a gripper surface. See the two gripper marks on that? Well, this goes over the top like this. You put the screw through there and have it kind of loose and move the plate up and down. That little device will help you get your top board exactly level with your layout so that there won't be any difference every time the door is closed. Now, as we said, the transom catch is the secret to the job, but the innovation that we're going to use is to attach a cable through a hole that we'll drill here in the transom catch. Best thing to do is go to a local bicycle shop. The handbrake and the gear shift lever cables that are used on bicycles is absolutely perfect for what we want to do here, with one little exception. Be sure that when you go to your bicycle shop and you buy the cable, that you get a cable that is not stainless steel. They make two different kinds, and for our purposes we need the cable that is not stainless steel, because at one point in time on that cable we're going to solder, and we have to solder using silver solder. This is a hardware store product. The silver solder comes with a paste flux. What is silver solder? It's a little tougher and stronger than regular solder. And we're going to solder two cables side by side for a little distance on this door, and silver solder is the only thing that does that really, really well. So don't use regular electrical solder. Use silver solder, and you must use the flux that comes with it. You'll find it packaged like this with the silver solder wrapped around the flux. It is absolutely necessary to put the flux on the cable before you apply heat and put the silver solder on. So you'll need the silver solder as well. The first thing you'll do is cut off the tapered end and keep the barrel end, that one right there. And the other thing you want to do is put about a 1/4 of an inch gap in here and bend a 90-degree angle. The first thing we need to do to our transom catch is drill a hole so that this cable will fit through a hole right here. That will substitute our finger for pulling it. Instead, the cable will pull it. Get the glasses on, and we'll drill a hole right here. When you're drilling metal, the secret is to go slowly and keep a lot of pressure on. If you let the drill go fast, it'll burn the tip. There. That's what we want to see when we're done. Because ultimately, when we put the cable in, it's going to go through there like this. And then our angle is going to come up like that and hold on like that. Once our cable is attached and we can pull on this with the cable has to be routed around under the door. And I used to think that you could just put some screw eyes in and pull the cable through those screw eyes, but what happens is it kinks the cable when you do that. So what we really need are some nice plastic rollers, like this. That will let the cable fit into the plastic roller and roll around there, rather than kink it on those eyes. I found these in Lowe's and Home Depot. These were made for replacement rollers for screen doors, like patio screen doors, but they work perfectly for what we want. There's several different kinds. Some have bearings in the middle, some don't. Get the cheap ones. Get the ones without the bearings, like this one. The other thing you need to do is go to a hardware store, and I don't mean a big box store, like a regular good hardware store, and get some bolts. And these bolts fit perfectly on the holes on the roller. Now, you have to have the bolt because we want something to hold that roller tightly, and the roller won't move around on it. But we're going to drive that bolt right into the underside of the plywood of your layout. We don't want to use a screw because a screw is tapered and won't hold on to this roller very well, but a bolt will. So how do you put a bolt in plywood and make it hold? Well, I'll show you. Here's our 1/4 inch bolt. And I've got this drill bit index so I can just show you very clearly. The bolts I got were round head slotted ones This is a 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch in length. See, it fits the 1/4 inch hole right there. So we want the bit just below that. In this case, it's a 7/32 bit. And we're going to make a hole in the bottom of our train table that's 7/32 of an inch diameter. So we'll use that bit. And drill a test hole so that you can see what happens. This is a piece of 1/2 inch BC plywood, which yours could be 3/4, it could be some other material, but that's where most of them are, so I'll use it as a test. And we'll make a nice clean hole like that. Now, the wheel that goes on here fits on the bolt perfectly. There's very little slop on the bolt so that it spins nicely on that bolt like that. We want to raise this up off of the bottom of the plywood a little bit, so I'm going to add some washers to the bottom of the bolt. Let's put on 2 or 3. And the reason I'm doing that is I don't want the cable to be dragging against the plywood surface. So I've got three washers like that, and that leaves about a 1/2 inch of threads. So we're going to take this bolt and place it right on the hole we drilled, and watch what happens. We'll screw that in until it's tight. Okay. Now, that's what we want to see. We want to see this wheel slightly up off the bottom, but look, it can't turn. So all we need to do is back this screw off about 1/4 of a turn, and the wheel turns fine on the bolt now. Now we've got a nice smooth turning wheel that our cable can go around and it won't drag. And it won't kink the cable. We need some kind of a handle that we can easily grab, throw the handle, and the door will open up and drop away or hinge away. I like to make my own, okay? If you go into a hardware store, get a piece of steel like this. This is called flat stock steel. Happens to be an 1/8 inch thick and about a 3/4 wide piece. I kind of like that because that's about just right for grabbing with your hand and using that for a handle. You'll cut this to length, and we'll go out and figure out what length we need in a moment. But when you do, be advised that any kind of cut you put on this steel with a hacksaw blade is going to leave very sharp and dangerous edges. You'll just need to put a smooth single cut file all over those edges, the corners, each side and everything, so that you get a nice friendly end. Here's a piece of metal I cut off of that bar, and on my application it's about 1 foot long. That's going to be fine for what I'm doing. It may be shorter or longer for yours, and I'll show you why in a few moments. But in my case, 1 foot was okay. On one end, I used a 1/4 inch drill bit and drilled a 1/4 inch hole. One of these bolts is going to pass through that hole like that to hold it in place on the bottom of the door. In addition to that, we need a couple of holes up here that are 1/8 of an inch. There's one there, and that's going to be for this little device. This is a return spring, and it's going to attach into this hole. This is something I found at Home Depot. The particular spring I found was part number C219. It was a pair of return springs, and that's going to do just fine. A return spring is something that's compressed in its natural state and stretches, like an old screen door spring used to do in the 50s, if you go back that far. We're going to attach that spring onto the hole that we left right here. Let's see if we can get it up in there. There we go. There. Here's our handle that we made in the other room with the return spring on it and the piece of steel. Well, on my door, I cut a slot right in here for this handle to come through so that you can reach like this. Eventually, that's what will open the door. Now, how far it moves and everything else, you'll have to determine on your own layout, but you only need to move about that much to pull those transom catches out of the latch. But you can have the handle move a long way and then attach the fulcrum point for that cable clear down here. How do you make that slot? I just took a square like this and said, okay, let's draw a couple of lines on the wood like this. In the case of our steel handle, it's an 1/8 inch flat steel stock. So I took a drill bit and drilled 2 or 3 holes side by side, and then cut them out with a file and put in a saber saw and go right down the slot and cut it out. So that's how you can do the slot. You may have other better ways in your particular application, but I wanted to show you how I did it here. Here's that striker plate that we looked at earlier. And I've already roughed out the hole right here and cut a hole with a saber saw into the wood. And this striker plate has these 2 latching plates, and that allows us to have a little room to slide it up and down like that, so we can do our final adjustment after we get the latch put on the door. But that's how it is, that's how it goes there. And in my application, I found out that the latch tried to hang up on the bottom edge of this. It wanted to have a little bit more of a brass lead in. So I bought this plate. This is brass stripper you can get at the hobby shops. I bought it, drilled a couple of holes, countersink the holes with that same countersink tool, and I'm going to put it in right there, and that will give it just a little bit more room so it will glide up nicely on it. Put that in, and then we'll go to the underside. There. That works great. Now we've got a latch. We're all set up. Now we need to install our pulleys and our cable. Works good. All right, here's our working lever that we made 2 of in the other room. We'll put it through the slot here. And then we're going to put one of those nice bolts through the lever. And once again, we're going to do like we did with the wheels. We're going to tighten it and then back it up just a little bit so that there's enough room for that to move evenly and smoothly. That's great. Now we're going to do one more thing. Let's put a screw in there to hold on to that spring. There we go. And we'll put the spring and hook it on there like that. Now we got a nice lever that goes all the way through that slot we cut and a return spring. We put all our rollers on, but this last roller that gets close to the bar here, let's put about 3 washers behind him so that he sets off of the plywood just a little bit. So let's reach up here and get him started. And that's too tight, so we back it off a 1/4 of a turn. Perfect. There. Now we've got all of our parts and pieces in place. We've got the roller, we've got the handle, and I've installed all the rest of the rollers around here too. So now it's time to thread that cable, and I'll show you how this is going to work. Well, we've already threaded the back cable through all the rollers. So let's get this front cable threaded. I'm going to go through the hole we drilled back in the shop. There we go. And here's that little angle that we made for that barrel tip. It's going to go right up there, just like that. This is a staple gun made by Arrow. It's a T33. That means the T33 gives you a rounded staple, and we're going to use that for a guide for the cable to hold it in place so that it doesn't jump the pulleys, like that. Okay. Now we'll thread it around this pulley and through here. Okay. Then we're going to go down to this one, and that's where we're going to attach it to the bar. All right, well, we've got them both threaded, and when we're done, we want to be able to open the door with either this handle or the handle in the front. But in order to do that, either one of the handles has to pull both wires equally so that both latches open up at the same time. Now, the way we're going to accomplish that is right here where these wires are together, we're going to silver solder them together so that when either one of them is pulled, it will pull both wires. The silver soldering job will be made a lot easier if we could get these two wires to position themselves perfectly against each other. So let's take the staple gun and just temporarily put a staple in real tight like this. Then we'll put another one over this way. That's where we're going to put the flux and the silver solder. Now here's the travel on the bar. Now we know that if we drill a hole right about in here on the bar, that will be where we'll mount the cable. Then the cable will travel with that hole. Now we don't know how much it has to travel yet, but if we just get it mounted onto there, then we'll determine the travel and install some stop screws here for the bar once that's determined. Now we're ready to drill our hole. There we go. Okay, we have threaded the cable through that hole that we made in the bar, and I've gone back and sort of tied it off, but now we're going to need some silver solder right here to make sure that this holds in place. And you must have the silver solder flux, as we said earlier at the workbench. Put a little bit on this old toothbrush, and we'll put it on like that. There we go. Get it all over the wire. All right. And then we'll use the silver solder and heat. Now, because this is a lot of wire, you have to have a lot of heat. Remember, it's the wire itself that has to melt the solder, not the tip of the soldering gun. And that wire has to be heated all through that knot for that to work. There, that's flowing nicely over all of the wire and all of the knot. We'll put just a little bit of additional heat on there. There. That looks good. Now the last thing we need to do is trim off this excess wire right up here. There we go. All right. Now, that should work nicely. Let's attach our spring. There. That's going to work beautifully. All we need to do now is put some solder right here where these two wires travel together so that when either handle is pulled, when it gets to this point, it'll pull both wires, opening up both catches, the front and the back. So in order to do that, all we need to do is get a little flux on the brush and put some flux on these wires, because we're going to try to heat the cable all the way down and apply some solder. Now once again, remember that with a little, a Weller 140 watt gun, you're asking that to heat a lot of metal up, so it's going to take a long time. So be very, very patient when you do this. So we're applying this solder all the way down this paired wire. So we're going to make this wire one wire. There, we got a nice flow going. Both wires are heating fine. There we go. Now that wire, both wires, are one wire from here to here because we have a nice silver solder connection all the way down. Now when either handle is pulled, when it gets to this point, it will pull the back latch and the front latch out at the same time. Let's test this to see if it works. Now I'm going to hold here because I don't know if this is going to come down perfectly. Oh, great. Well, that works wonderful. Okay, now the last thing we need to do is determine how much this bar had to move to do that, because we don't want to over pull on this cable. So I'll keep this pencil handy and we'll pull that. There, the door is falling right there. So I don't want this bar to travel any more than right there. So I'll put a screw right here that will stop that bar from traveling at that point. I'm going to put the screw way out here so that the bar hits it right there. And I think I'll start it just a little bit. All right. And then we'll drive it in. And that will stop the handle from going too far. There we go. Let's see how that works. That's perfect. So just to review, we've got our steel bar lever that we made. We anchored it here. We put a return spring on it here to help it go back to a rest position. We started the wire here, goes around that pulley. Then it goes into here where the two wires join together, right here at this solder joint. Then it goes on and the two wires go apart. This one goes down here. And every time the wire turns, we have to put it on a pulley so it won't kink. And it goes down to the latch. It looks complicated, but actually it's pretty simple. It's a Rube Goldberg device, but it sure does solve the problem. Let's see how she works. We'll try the back lever. Oh, that's good. That works good. And let's just go through. Try the front one. That works great. And it returns to the same place every time for a nice smooth joint. So that's exactly what we want to see. Our next step is going to be to put track on this road bed. And normally I wouldn't put the track on now, but I want to show you how the track works when you do a drop door. First, let's check and make sure that our road bed is nice and flat. Oh, yes, it is. See, we're smooth all the way across the joint here. Okay. So let's take a piece of track and we'll put it on the road bed where it's going to go. But oh, we got a little problem. Because we're putting this track on an angle across this door opening, this is going to be a little bit tricky because here's the angle that's already through the cork. It's going to come across the rail here. It's going to cut that tie, across the tie and rail here, and across that tie. So we're not only going to have to cut rails, but we're going to have to cut ties too, so that some of the ties travel with the door and the other part of the tie stays up here. This should be tricky. It'll be fun. But first, let's attach the track right to the road bed, and we'll cut it after it's attached. Well, there we go. We got our last screw in here. Now, we need to make a nice cut right through the rail, the tie, this rail and tie, and right through there, so we can get a smooth opening for the track. So we're going to use a Dremel tool to do that, and we have to make the cut this way, not this way. We've got to make it along the line of the opening. And if you cut this way, which obviously you have a choice of either doing it that or that, but you want to do it here because you want the track to pull back in a little bit that way so that when the table folds down it won't bind up anything. So let's try it and see if we can get this cut apart. There's one of them. Okay, we've completed our cut, and I can see that a couple of these ties are loose. We'll have to glue them in place so that they will ride on the door since they're now separated from the rest of the tie. Okay, let's clear this off and see how the door works. And there's our track separation. Works beautifully. Now we'll do a little bit of cleanup on the edges of the rails. And we'll put a spot of CA glue on the edge of the tie pieces so that they won't move around over time. All right, well that completes our project. We've made the cuts. Let's try it out. You can barely hear it going across there. Nice smooth joint. Door drops away. Works beautifully.